everybody, and welcome back to the House of Nostalgia. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Today's video is about the life and passing of a great bluesman and rock and roll star, Mr. Stevie Ray Vaughan. Now, this is what I do. I talk about the life of people from our past, but I probably wouldn't have talked about Stevie Ray so early because I was planning on adding him to my blues series. See, I had a lot going on this spring and summer. I worked a part-time job for 4 years, and I was feeling a little burnt out from working 2 jobs. So I quit the part-time job and I took a trip to visit my family in Chicago this summer. And together, my niece and I took a trip to New York City. Once I returned from this vacation, reality set in. And I realized that having a second job wasn't so bad after all. So I took a month-long course to make more money an hour on my part-time job. One day, my instructor had a photo of Stevie Ray Vaughan as his wallpaper, and he was surprised that I knew who he was. And I was the only person in the class who knew who he was. He said that Stevie Ray was his idol. He loved his music and he loved the blues. So I didn't tell him that I had a YouTube channel, but since Stevie Ray is his idol, maybe one day he will find this video. Stevie Ray Vaughan in Double Trouble was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2015. And as told on the Grammy Awards site, he was nominated for 13 Grammys and won 6. He is ranked in the top 10 as one of the greatest guitar players of all time, and he is also credited with bringing back the blues in the early 80s. Now, I believe that to be true because there were blues artists that I thought was R&B artists like Tyrone Davis, who was singing R&B in 1979, and I had no idea that he was a bluesman. I learned that later in life. And B.B. King had a crossover hit with Into the Night during the 80s, and it's obvious that that song wasn't meant to be a blues song. So was true blues artists looking in other avenues during this time? And that was sort of like a spinoff to the type of blues that started popping up in the late 80s and all through the 90s. Now, in this video, I'm going to tell you how I knew about Stevie Ray during the time I was so heavily into R&B and pop. So be sure to thumbs up the video and subscribe to the channel. Stevie Ray Vaughan was born October the 3rd, 1954 in Dallas, Texas, to James Lee Vaughan and Martha Jean Cook. The stories that he told about his childhood let you know that he had some sad experiences while growing up. He received a toy guitar from Sears at the age of 7, which started his love for playing the guitar. Stevie learned how to play by listening to some of his favorite artists, which consisted of blues, rock and roll, and jazz guitarists. He never had training, and he never learned to read sheet music. Now, teaching yourself to play an instrument well is not uncommon, but imagine a 6-time Grammy Award winner never learning to read sheet music, but playing with some of the greats is on another level. By the time he made it to high school, he had played with quite a few garage bands. He dropped out of school and moved to Austin, Texas, and formed his first band called the Cobras. When the band departed, he formed another band named Triple Threat, and that band consisted of Luann Barton on vocals, Chris Layton on drums, and Jackie Newhouse on bass. He believed in his talent and he stayed consistent. Now, he didn't just move to Austin and become famous overnight. He did rely on friends for a place to lay his head. But it wasn't long before he had a come up because he became very popular on the Austin music club scene. He was most definitely an attraction. It wasn't hard to see that Jimi Hendrix was one of his idols. He studied Hendrix's guitar tricks. His brother Jimmy Vaughan, who he was inspired by, actually played with Hendrix in the late 60s. A lot of people don't know that Hendrix studied the blues singer T-Bone Walker, who did the same tricks and more before Hendrix did it. Now, I want to say this right now while this is on my mind. I said in one of my videos that Prince studied Hendrix, and someone said no, Prince studied Little Richard. Now, let's get this clear. Little Richard was studied by everybody. He was in the forefront of rock and roll, and Hendrix played in his band for a while. And he was also what I would call Mr. Electric. He was an excellent piano player, originator, and performer. But what he wasn't known for was playing the guitar. Now, Prince played a few instruments, but he was heavily influenced by Jimi Hendrix when it come down to his guitar performances and one of his many changing styles. Now back to Stevie Ray Vaughan. Around the end of the 70s, Stevie formed his band Double Trouble, and the name of his band comes from the title of one of his blues idols' Otis Rush song, which was written and performed by Rush in 1958. He had other people that he studied while perfecting his talents, and that was Lonnie Mack, Kenny Burrell, Wes Montgomery, Buddy Guy, and Albert King. The original members of Double Trouble was Chris Layton on drums, who continued on from the Triple Threat Band, Tommy Shannon on bass, and later Reese Winan on keyboard. Once he formed Double Trouble, the doors started to open up for him. He was getting noticed and being hired by other famous musicians to perform for them. In 1982, while playing in the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland, he was approached by David Bowie to perform in his up-and-coming album, Let's Dance. I watched some of his 1982 Montreux Jazz performance on YouTube, and it was amazing. David Bowie's Let's Dance album come out in April 1983, and Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble album was released just 2 months later in June of 1983. His career took off real fast after the release of Texas Flood. He was a sensation. Absolutely. He had to be for me to know anything about him, because as I stated, I knew very little about the blues at that time. His first video was Love Struck Baby. My all-time favorite song of his is on this album, and that's Mary Had a Little Lamb. Now, we all know that this was a poem written by Sarah Josepha Hale in the 1800s, and this song was recorded by other artists, but the first blues artist to rewrite this song and record it was Buddy Guy in 1968. Now, when Buddy Guy recorded this song, in my opinion, it sounded more like a rock and roll sound. I don't know if that's what he was trying to do, but that's what it sounded like to me. So Stevie Ray re-recorded Buddy Guy's version, and he approached the recording in a more blues, laid-back version. Now, his version of that song was immortalized in the movie From Dusk to Dawn, because it was people who had never heard it before. Now, I'm about to get off track for a minute, as I always do. In the 80s, we had this big boom of foreign music. Now, today they call this era the second wave of British music, thanks to MTV. And a lot of this music was coming from different parts of the world. Heavy metal and punk rock was popular as well, and young teens were dressing like them and wearing their hair like them. So when the movie From Dusk to Dawn come out 13 years later, a lot of people had never heard the song before, because we had so much going on music-wise in the 80s. A lot of younger people wasn't into blues or rock and roll. They were into this otherworldly music. And one thing about Quentin Tarantino, he's good with the music in his movies. 2 live albums were released before his second album, Couldn't Stand the Weather. which was Force of Nature 2 in 1983 and Live at Loreley Festival in 1984. The album Couldn't Stand the Weather went gold after its release in '84, which featured his version of the Jimi Hendrix song Voodoo Child. My favorite song on this album was Cold Shot, and he made an original video for this song. It was different, and it was on repeat. He released Soul to Soul in 1985, and unfortunately, I really didn't keep up with his career too much after this album, mainly because, just like all the other videos I made, I was heavily into rap, R&B, and pop. But he was still a big deal though, and I would hear bits and pieces about his career. During an MTV news break, I remember them saying that he entered rehab for an addiction. The photo that my teacher had of him performing on stage, it's obvious that he was under the influence of something. This photo is nowhere on the internet, so I believe it was a personal photo. I'm pretty sure it was, because out of all the photos he could have had of him as his wallpaper, he had that particular photo. In 1986, he released another live album called Live Alive. And now I don't know if he needed a break, but it was 4 years before he released In Step in 1989. This album showcased the growth in his writing abilities. Maybe that was the reason that he took so long to release this album. The Fire Meets the Fury was also released in that same year. And this was a very successful and popular album. He won Best Contemporary Blues Recording Grammy for this album. On August 26, 1990, Stevie Ray Vaughan had just wrapped up an encore performance with Eric Clapton, Robert Cray, Buddy Guy, and his brother Jimmy Vaughan. At 12:40 a.m. the following morning, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Bobby Brooks, Nigel Brown, and Colin Smythe boarded the Bell Jet Ranger 3 helicopter along with the pilot Jeffrey Brown. The fog and the bad weather conditions caused the helicopter to crash into the side of a nearby ski hill shortly after takeoff. There were no survivors in the crash. Stevie Ray Vaughan was 35 years of age. A lot of things were said about who was supposed to be on the helicopter that morning and who wasn't. I can't explain why things happen the way that they do, and I don't have an opinion on it. Before his death, Stevie Ray and his brother Jimmy Vaughan recorded an album together that was named Family Style. The album was released September the 20th, 1990. This was the brothers' only album collaboration together. Jimmy Vaughan has worked extremely hard during his career to keep his brother's legacy alive. A memorial of Stevie Ray Vaughan was erected in Austin, Texas in 1994. The bronze statue was created by Ralph Helmick. Thousands of his fans has visited the memorial. It is a very popular tourist attraction. The blues are a little different now. You know, we have a new crop of blues artists with a whole new sound, and I won't knock that because they are giving us something different, just like Stevie Ray did. He gave us exceptional talent with a little blues and rock and a little jazz mixed in, and we loved it. Thank you so much for watching this video on Mr. Stevie Ray Vaughan.